Hello and welcome to our Ranorex webinar, Ranorex Studio Demo with live question and answers. My name is Andreas and it's a pleasure to be your host today. What is our plan for today? I start by giving you a very short overview of Ranorex Studio's key features, and then we will step into the live demo, which is supposed to be a mixture of showing you how to do desktop test automation using Ranorex Studio and you hopefully asking a lot of questions. So we have extended the QA panel, and that's why today's webinar will be extended to some 90 minutes. It takes us 4 slides, and I would like to start by telling you what are the main characteristics of Ranorex. So Ranorex is an easy to use, click and go test automation tool. We call it a one-day productivity tool. We have an easy to use recorder. You could create hierarchical structures and group into modules, do some reuse and sharing project libraries and repositories. After each test run, you receive a highly configurable report with the test results being presented in HTML, XML, or PDF formats. These reports can be stored locally, sent by mail, and shared with colleagues, so whatever you would like to do. And all in all, it's an all-in-one cross-technology test automation tool. You could perform desktop, web, and mobile tests, and of course, hybrid or mixed test requirements can be met with Ranorex Studio. Ranorex Studio's core functionalities are, it runs mainly on Windows systems, of course, but it implements great technology support and it has the best-in-class object recognition with the ability for stable selectors, which are even usable in a dynamic UI environment. So if your graphical user interface changes over time, it's no problem for Ranorex Studio to identify and track even heavily changed graphical user interfaces. Of course, we support a fully featured 100% codeless test automation. So you need not to be a programmer to use the full functionality of Ranorex Studio. But we also offer a professional Visual Studio embedded C# and Visual Basic.NET API waiting for .NET developers to be used. And in between, you can enrich your codelessly designed test solution with code modules or user code functions in any level of complexity, from prepared, easy to apply automation helpers up to customized user code. Of course, Ranorex Studio can be used to design and run all kinds of automated functional UI tests. This includes automated smoke or sanity testing of graphical user interface-based applications, as well as, of course, automated regression testing, which is really one of Ranorex Studio's key applications. And you need to know that tests can be executed locally on your test machine or remote on physical or virtual test installations, just one after the other or agent-based in a very controlled test pipeline. And last but not least, I would like to tell you a little bit about the options of how to integrate Ranorex Studio. Ranorex Studio itself is based on Visual Studio IDE and offers all of its functionalities and features. Of course, there's a great support of code control, source control, and version control. We support Git, Subversion, and Microsoft Team Foundation Server. And of course, Ranorex can seamlessly be integrated into the most common CI systems, just like Jenkins, Azure DevOps, or even Bamboo. Yes, there's one question from an attendee already that he's asking if Bamboo can be, if Ranorex Studio can of course be integrated into Bamboo, but unfortunately it's not possible to run Ranorex Studio tests on Linux. If it's Linux where you perform your tests on, then probably, and if it's web tests, then probably you need to switch to web tested, which is another great tool of Ranorex. And last but not least, of course, we also have interfaces to Jira as an issue tracking tool, or to TestRail, which is a sister product of us for test management. And yeah, well, this completes the lineup. And that's everything I wanted to tell you at the beginning when it comes to the key functionalities and characteristics of Ranorex Studio. So, yes, I would like to start now by showing you what we will learn today. What is my plan for today? So the guideline, the rough guideline is as follows. I would like to start by, showing you the basic Ranorex Studio working environment and show you how to create a new desktop test solution. I will show you how easy it is to record a simple test scenario. So I've prepared a simple test scenario, and we will have a look of how to record a test in a codeless way. We will run the test, and I would like to introduce you to reading and interpreting a test report. We will, of course, try out some features, which are the video capturing tool or the maintenance debugging mode. And some additional topics along the way will be, of course, an overview of the Ranorex Studio's working environment. I will explain to you the concept of actions and repository items and their correlation to each other. I will introduce to you of how to work towards some efficient work by means of structuring and modularization. And yes, if there's time, I will explain to you how validation works as a key feature, a key concept, and how it looks like if it fails. Hopefully enriched with your questions, which I hopefully will be able to answer right in a way. So that's the plan for today. I'm using a demo application. So what I have prepared is a little demo application. It's always useful to have some secure environment. You could use any desktop application for testing with Ranorex Studio, and we have a small demo application. It has some functionalities like there's a little database for data-driven testing, some image-based playground here, because Ranorex Studio is also, of course, able to do some image-based automation. We have some UI test element area and an upload testing area for dealing with timing issues. Ranorex Studio efficiently handles dynamic identifiers, and this is a playground where you could prove this, and there's some final object identification panel. And what we will do today is I have a very small test scenario, and the test scenario is like I'm inserting here a name, let's say Harry, and submit it to the software here. And what happens is that the welcome message changes according to the string which has been inserted here. And this is the basis for our validation. So we will validate if this welcome message changes. One question, is this demo application also available for testing? Yes, of course it is. I just give you a link right in a second. And of course, you could also, I will also put that in a summary at the end of today's webinar. So this is the link where you could download the demo application from our download server. It's free available, and you could use it for any kind of testing experience. And finally, at the end, we will reset the welcome message again so that it turns into its initial state here by only showing welcome. So this is the test scenario for today's test. And yes, as I have explained this to you, I would say let's start into it, and let's start Ranorex Studio, which I already have done here. So this is Ranorex Studio showing the start screen, and I'm using Ranorex Studio in its current version 9.2, which has been released, a couple of months ago. A new release is up to come end of February, 9.3. So just to show you, just to mention you. And here we have the start area where we have a solution wizard creating a new solution. We have access to some recent solutions or sample solutions. There's always some news in here, links to our most popular blog posts, information about the license and stuff like that. And usually you make use of the so-called solution wizard. The solution wizard guides us through the creation of a test solution in some easy steps. And at the beginning, here you can see the opportunity to select among different test solutions. We could select a desktop testing solution, something which we will do today. Then, of course, you have the opportunity to do some web testing. This is something which I will show you on Thursday this week. Of course, it's also possible to test on mobile devices like Android devices, iOS devices. And this is something which we also cover in a webinar. And this will be a webinar which is held bi-monthly in exchange to the web testing webinar. So the mobile testing webinar will be held end of February. And blank solutions enable you to do some hybrid or mixed testing. So whenever it comes to the requirement to test a desktop with a mobile device or a mobile with a web testing, then a blank solution is the solution of your choice. So we are choosing a desktop test solution, and now 4 easy ways guide us through the creation of a new test solution. First of all, I should give it a name, and I call it, let's call it desktop testing. And I will change the default folder into the downloads folder. This makes it easier for me to show you some things in here. And that's the first step, and I click continue. In a second step, I need to select the application under test. So that is the application which needs to be tested. And you have the choice between all the running processes already on your desktop, or you could browse for an application, which I will do. And I'm browsing for this demo application here, which I have also stored in the downloads folder. And I let it launch automatically by Ranorex, which releases me from doing this on my own. You could give some startup arguments if necessary. We don't have them, so I simply click continue. Now, the almost last question, the third of 4 steps here, is about the selecting the recording behavior. We call it the whitelisting feature. And what is the whitelisting feature? It's very simple explained. You could focus on your very single application. This means that only a recording action in your application is taken into account and is recorded in your list of actions. On the other hand, if I apply no focus, then any interaction on the desktop will be recorded. So it doesn't focus on one application, but on any application on your desktop. And in between, you're able to define a list of applications which could be taken into account. And for the sake of simplicity, I focus on my single application now and click continue. At the end, we are informed about the so-called tutorial panel. So Ranorex Studio offers a so-called tutorial panel. This is a very useful feature once you're alone and once you're not that experienced, and it guides you through the first necessary and useful steps in creating a test solution. We won't use it for today's webinar, but I click finish now and let Ranorex Studio prepare my test solution. So what Ranorex Studio does now is, first of all, it starts my application under test. You could see it in the foreground here. And I take Ranorex Studio in the foreground again. And Ranorex Studio has prepared my test solution. And what I first would like to show you is and introduce to you is the so-called working environment. So what we have here on the right side here with this changing and blinking screen is the so-called tutorial panel. I will disable it for the moment because I don't want to have it here. I would like to have a larger screen for us to look at. And you don't have to worry. Whatever you change in the view can be made visible again through the Views button here. So whenever I would like to have it back, it's the first steps in Ranorex Studio. I have it back here on my screen. So it's never gone forever. You could make it visible again. But to be back in my working environment, I have on the left side here, I have the two panels, which is the projects view pad and the module browser view. The projects pad here has the solution. So this is what I created. The solution is the so-called basic container of a test. I have a project, a default project here. It's called desktop testing, so it has the same name as the solution. And this contains finally the most important thing, which is my so-called test suite. And this is what I have here. So I have here, I have my test suite view, which means I have my basic container for my test. I have a first test case here, a default test case with some setup area where the application under test is started. So this is this application. Then I have a default recording here, which will contain all the recorded test actions. And I have a so-called teardown area, which is performed at the end of this test case and which contains a recording module to close this test application again. So this is somehow a first default test case, and I will explain it further as we go along the way. Down there, we have a so-called output area where all the report, where the errors, the debug information, or simply the output information is displayed. And we have another interesting view. This is the so-called module browser view. And the module browser view only contains the recording and code modules which are used to build a test case in here. But yes, something done is worth 1,000 words, and that's why I think we should simply start recording the test now. That's why I double-click the recording here. The recording is initially empty, of course. So recording, up here we have the register panels where we could switch between the views, and the recording is empty now. So in the upper part of the window, you see an empty list of actions, and down there you see an empty repository, and I will explain those a little bit later. What we do now is we simply will create a new test recording. That's why I click the record button here. And what you could see now is that I have the recorder control center in the lower right corner with a red color indicating that we are in recording mode. And we have our application under test here. And you could see my mouse pointer. And the mouse pointer indicates some kind of inactivity now. And as soon as I could click here on the desktop and nothing happens. You see that the recorder is still empty. As soon as I hover my mouse over my application under test, the mouse pointer indicates recording activity by means of this red dot. And this is the so-called whitelisting feature. So Ranorex now ignores everything which is done outside here. So I could close this window, nothing happens here. Ranorex is ignoring what I do outside of my application. But as soon as I hover my mouse in here, you see that I have a red frame following my mouse pointer, and I could click into this name text field here, and you can see immediately I have a recorded action in here. At any time, you also can pause your recording. So I could click pause, and I have a gray color here. And now I have time to rearrange things on my screen here. And what you could see here is that I have my first recording in here. At any time, I can continue my recording again. And if this recording has been done accidentally, you could even immediately delete it. You could view a screenshot which shows you the associated UI element, and it tells you this is the recording number 1. It's a mouse click event where the left mouse button has been clicked. And you could, as I told you, immediately delete it again here. So now it's time to record our test scenario. Let's first of all click into this name text field, then insert a name here. And you can see we have a mouse click action, we have a key sequence action here. Now I click the submit button. As you can see, it's the third action again here. We have a changed welcome message, and that's now the point where we need to insert the validation. Now we would like to validate if this welcome message really changed, and that's why I click the validate button in my recorder control center, and immediately you can see now that the validation has started and the recording is paused. So we have a purple color here, and as soon as I hover my mouse over the test application, you can see a purple frame is following my mouse pointer. And this purple frame indicates the UI element which is currently selected for the validation. So we would like to validate this welcome message, and that's why we click it. And validation is always a two-step process. The first step is a selection of the UI element. I confirm this by next, and the second is a specification of what I would like to validate. In our case, we would like to validate if the text here is changed to welcome Harry. And that's why the text attribute is already pre-selected here. So Ranorex makes some kind of educated guess. So it's already assuming that we want to check for a text here. So I click OK, and we now have the validation action in our action list in here. The recording is continued, as you can see at the red color. So we finally click the reset button, and yes, we are finished now with our test scenario. That's why we click stop to end our recording. So far, so good. What we have done now is we have recorded our first test scenario. And I would like to continue now by explaining to you what we have recorded here. So let me again point this out by means of a spotlight. What we have here, we are still in our recording number 1, and what we have here now is a list of 5 recorded actions, and the sequence order of these actions is the sequence of their recording or appearance within the test case. And down there we have a so-called repository, and what are those is easily answered. If I click the first action here, then you can see it's a mouse click action with the left mouse button here. It is on a specified location, and it is somehow connected with a so-called repository item. And the repository item is highlighted down there. And what is a repository item? The repository item is the reference of, or the internal representation of the graphical user interface element. So if I highlight this element here, you could easily see what it is in our application. It's the text entry field. So the mouse click has been performed on the text entry field here. The second action is a key sequence action where the name Harry has been inserted. And again, it's associated with our text entry field here. The third action is again a mouse click action, but it's performed on the submit button here. So the submit button is the button here, which is represented by this repository item. Then the fourth action is performed on the welcome message, which is this. And this is the label welcome message. And it's also, yeah, I can highlight it here. You can see it. And finally, the last action is a click on the reset link here. And it's the reset link in here. So this is sometimes we ask, why do we separate these repository items from the actions? And the answer is very simple, because we can better reuse them. So for instance, we have this name entry field here, only stored once, but we use it at least here in 2 actions, the mouse click action and the key sequence action. So this is why we separate repository items from actions. So almost any action here is linked to a UI element in our application, which is represented by a repository item. So I told you too much now. It's time to see what we have done and if we can run this, this test recording. So I click save here and I close the recording. And what we have here is now our test case. So we are back in our test suite and we simply would like to run the recording. Running a recording is very easy. We have a run button here. The only thing I should tell you ahead is once you start a test suite running, you should keep your fingers from the mouse and the keyboard, because this would interfere the test execution. The test execution is just as you would perform the test, but in an automatic way. Let me show you what I mean. I simply hit the run button, and what Ranorex does now is Ranorex is preparing the solution. It's starting a debug information window soon. That's the debug information. Then it's starting the application under test, and it is performing the test recording. So you could see it immediately now. So it's inserting the name into the name text field, hitting the submit button, validating, hitting the reset button again, and finally ending up in a report. The test execution might have been a little bit too quick for you, but we will do it several times afterwards, and then you will have time to watch it more closely. What we have now is, this already told you, after each test run, we get a report. And the most important thing here is our pie chart. If it is green, it tells you that we have a successful test run, and we will soon step into the test case here. But there is one question coming in, and I would like to answer this question right in a way. How are passwords recorded? Passwords are a very difficult thing, because usually you would like to insert, or you have to insert passwords if you want to test the login process, but you don't want the password to be visual to testers or to anybody watching the test or stuff like that. So of course, Ranorex has a way of handling that. Usually you do not hard code the passwords into the test. You use a data source where the passwords and the usernames are stored, and then you are able to mask the passwords. So you are able to mask data so that they are inserted correctly and used correctly, but they are not visible within the test or the report. That's the way how Ranorex handles that. And another question is, do we have an option to repeat the test many times? Yes, of course. This is the basic concept of test automation. The concept of test automation is not only to repeat one test several times, so you can repeat it twice or 10 times, 1,000 times. The basic concept of test automation is also to perform data-driven tests. So of course, you can do some iterations, simple iterations, and test it 1,000 times if you want to, but you can also make iterated tests based on different data. So you can combine data sources and perform the test in different settings with different data. Can you quickly show the validate option as I missed it? Yes, I will show it right in a second. Please give me some time and we will analyze the validation in a couple of minutes. So what to do when we are unable to capture any element? Yes, capturing elements will also be kept just in a second. So let me continue a little bit with the report now, and then we will analyze our recording, do some modularization, and then I will show you what to do with capturing the elements. So first of all, let me step back here to the report now, and we could open here the test case, so we could expand all the details, and what you see in here is now a very detailed execution of all our recorded test actions. So first of all, we started the application under test. It is started here. Then we did a mouse click into the name text field here. We inserted the name Harry into the text field. There's a click on the submit button, and so on and so forth. There was the validation. If the text really confirms to welcome Harry, the validation was ended with a success. You could see that in the green printed text here. Otherwise, it would have been red and the test case would have failed. Then there was a click on the reset button, and finally, at the end, we were closing the application again. So this is a usual test report, which comes along with every test run, test execution, and you could see the test, the name of the report contains the date and the time of its creation. So it's very easy usually to have that organized in a good way. So to step back into the projects folder here, you could see we have a reports folder here, and all the reports are stored in this folder. So I could double click it to open it again. And of course, you could see here in the information here on which machine the test has been executed, when it has been executed, how long it took us to execute it, and so on and so forth. So this is information here. So one question again here, iterations through coding, or is there some tool option in Ranorex? Of course, there's some tool option in Ranorex. You could iterate a test several times just by inserting an action. So just 1 second, if I open up the properties panel here, so whenever you hit F4 or right click for the properties here, you have the property window of this test case, and what you could see here is that a simple iteration is done by an iteration counter. So if I set here 10, then the test case is iterated 10 times. But again, instead of stupidly iterating a test case, it is far more smarter to iterate it based on different data. And another question is here, can you plan test execution in Ranorex Studio? Yes, of course you can. So there's not only an option to run the tests on remote machines, it's also an option of executing tests based on agents. So we are able to define agents, and then you can define test cases in a sequence and do a night run or something like that. And of course, you also can integrate Ranorex Studio tests into continuous integration systems, and there you can timely plan your test executions as well. Of course, this is possible. Another question is, can we have the test report on test suite level in addition to test case level? Yes, the answer is quite simple. We have this is a default test report, which contains a default set of granularity or detail. And of course, we have a very enriched option to individualize the test reports, which means we have 5 different levels of detail which can be placed into a report or which can be kept out of a report. And I will show you a little bit later on. And then you, of course, can completely individualize your report. So you can specify what you would like to have inserted in the report and what you would like to have kept out of a report. So let me keep track of one more question. Can you define how slow, fast the test? This is a very nice question. Can you define how slow or fast the test runs? So let me point that out. You have remembered the test run, and the test run runs in a way that it somehow simulates user input. And the way I showed it to you is the default way. So we have some default time delays in between. Every recording module has a so-called turbo mode, which means it speeds up. So it removes somehow the time delays between the actions, so a click action or a validation action or something like that. And so you could speed up a little bit, but you always have to keep in mind that testing a graphical user interface always has to do with waiting for some UI elements to appear. So an application is not always that fast when it comes to appearance of graphical user interfaces, and Ranorex has always to keep track of that. So Ranorex always tries to wait for user UI elements to appear on the screen. So there's a certain point where you cannot finally speed up anymore, because we need to wait for the graphical user interface to build up and to react. And this cannot be speed up without any border. So which version of iOS and Android does Ranorex support? So today we don't have a mobile app testing webinar, but I could tell you it's always the latest iOS and Android, so almost the latest iOS and Android. Please reach out to our online user guide, and there you will find the information of the currently supported mobile versions. So I would like to step on a little bit how to slow down the recorded test. Yes, there's a possibility to slow down the test a little bit. So let me first show you how to structure the test. So let me keep track of my agenda. I'm 52 now and I have to keep track of my agenda, else I will be lost in hyperspace. So what have we done so far? Let me recap a little bit. So first of all, we started Ranorex Studio and created a new solution. We already recorded a test scenario and we ran the test and we read the report. I already gave an overview of the working environment and showed you the concept of actions and repository item. Now, I would like to show you how to structure a test, and along with that, I will show you how to slow down the recorded tests, so just to have a better overview of what happens during the test. So this is the next I would like to do, and along this, I can answer some more questions then. So what we have for the moment is we have one recording here with 5 different actions, and it's not a good practice to have so many actions in one recording, as it is not a good practice to have a test case here with only one recording module. So I would like to show you how to change that a little bit. So first of all, let me remove this recording out of our test case. So I have removed it from the test case, but don't be afraid, it's still there. So if I have the module browser view, I still have my recording in here. It's not, I only deleted it from the test case. So, and let me now rename this test case to test welcome message change. So this is what the test case is about. And when we step into the recording, I would now like to show you how to modularize. So I would like to come towards a more efficient way of working, and efficient work is always a work where we could reuse things. And that's why we now split this recording up into fewer, smaller recording modules. And I'm looking for actions which belong together. And so these 2 actions, the click into the name text field and the insertion of the name, they belong together. So I simply select them, I right-click them, and I move them to a new recording module. And I call this recording module insert name. And I click create, and I have a new recording module now, which is called insert name and which only contains these 2 actions. I save this recording module and I close it. The remaining default recording module, recording number 1, only contains the remaining 3 actions. Clicking the submit button is the only action. I right click it and I move it to a new recording module and I call it submit name and I click create. Again, I have a small recording module. I save it and I close it. The mouse click on the reset button is also a sole action which I move into reset message, a module. I save it and I close it. And I have the remaining validation action, which I keep in the recording module, but I rename it. So recording number 1 is not recording number 1, it's validate message. So what we have now is what you see here is I have not only one recording, I have a number of small recordings. And what I can do now is I can build a test case here out of these small recordings. It's like building a test case, like playing with Lego bricks. So what I do now is, what do I need to do? So I have the test case. During the setup, I'm starting my application. And during the teardown, I'm closing the application. And in between now, I need to build my test case. So first of all, I need to insert a name. So I drag it from here and drop it on my test case. Inserting the name is the first action. Now submitting the name is the next action. Again, I drop it on my test case. So you can see it's the second module here. Validating the message is the third one. And finally, resetting the message is the last one. So what I have now here is the same test case as I had before, but in a much better structured way. So you may agree that this test case is much better readable, and you even could build a second test case now and can reuse other recording modules out of the box. And I would like to refer to one question, how to slow down the recorded test now. This is very easily done. Let's create a new small recording module which simply performs a time delay. So I would like to show you how to do that. Let's create a new recording module. It's up here, so very simple. Let's give it a name, and I should give it a name delay 2 seconds. And click create. And what we have is an empty recording module, and we simply can fill it up with a new action. So we're searching for a new action, and here you can see the availability of all the actions we have. And let's go for a delay. So down there we have a time delay, and you could specify it's by default ½ second, but I make it 2 seconds now and hit the return key. So I have a very simple recording module. It's called delay 2 seconds, and it performs a simple time delay. I save it and I close it, and now I have it here. And I can use it now as many times as I want to. So I insert it between insertion of the name and submitting. I can also insert it after the validation. And finally, I could insert it just before closing the application. So you can see I have in my module browser, I have a tool set of reusable small recording modules, and I can use them to build a test case here in my test suite. And I would like to, before I answer some more questions, I would like to simply run this test case here. So I hit the run button, and again, I release my fingers from mouse and keyboard and watch the test run. So first you see the debug information window here. And Ranorex Studio is preparing the solution. So we are waiting for the application to start. So here's the application. Now the name will be inserted. We are waiting for 2 seconds now. Then the submit button is hit and the validation is performed, 2 seconds waiting. The reset button is clicked, 2 seconds waiting, and finally the application has been closed. So this is a way of slowing down the test execution a bit. And if we step into the report here, then you can see that whenever a delay has appeared, it has been executed in here. So far so good. Time for some questions. First question, is there any auto delay if a U element has not yet been found? This is a very good question. Thank you very much. So again, if anybody did not understand it, is there some kind of automatic delay for waiting for UI elements? This is handled very easily. So Ranorex has an automatic delay, an automatic waiting time. It's called a search time. So Ranorex tends to perform the test execution in its own speed, but in case a UI element doesn't show up, Ranorex is waiting for the UI element. So especially for the validation, if it comes to the validation, I should show that. So here we have a validation action, which we will have a closer look on in a couple of minutes, but let me show you this time delay here. I open up by pressing the F4 button, the properties, and what we have here is a so-called grace period. You will find that here on the right side here. It's a grace period, which means Ranorex tries to make a validation very quickly, but if the validation turns out to be a failure due to some UI element not showing up or any other case, Ranorex is waiting up to 3 seconds and gives the UI element, the UI, graphic user interface, to show up. So this is of course done, and you could change this. So if you have, especially if you do some web testing, it's especially necessary to wait for UI, for web pages to be loaded, to appear on the screen. And of course, we take this into account, and Ranorex is waiting for those elements within defined times. So another question. Can we use the saved modules in other test suites? Yes, a very good question. You can share recording modules and repositories in other test suites, in other test solutions, of course. This is, we would be a poor tool if this would not be possible. So of course you can, especially in larger projects, it's the case that you have one or more persons being responsible for tracking UI elements. This is something which I will show you right in a second now. And then you build up a kind of a repository, and then you would like to share this repository to different teams working with different test cases. And of course, this is necessary and this is possible. So first of all, there's two questions now regarding mobile testing. Again, mobile testing is not today's topic, but let me answer this shortly. You can connect a mobile device by means of Wi-Fi or USB to Ranorex, to the Ranorex test solution, but the preferred connection is a cable-based through USB and not through Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is much more not that stable, and you should do that using a cable. And it's independent if you test on a virtual machine or on a physical machine. Mobile devices have to be connected through USB cable to perform the test on them. So can tests, one very good question. Can tests be executed by someone who does not have access to Ranorex Studio? Yes, and I would like to show you this right now, because this is a very interesting topic and it's asked many times. This is the basic principle. So what I show you here is I have my downloads folder here, and this is the solution folder of my Ranorex test solution. So it's called desktop testing here, the solution, and the folder is called desktop testing. once we open it, we see that we have the solution file here, which is some kind of a Visual Studio file, and we have the projects file. And there's a number of files we won't go through now, but there's one specific folder. It's called the output folder. And the output folder is always the bin debug folder. And within here, all the reports are stored. And what is interesting is that we have an executable file in here. It has the same name as the solution. It's desktop testing, and it's an exe file. And it's a runtime file of our test execution. And I can show you this right in the second. Let me open up let me open up a terminal window, and let's switch into this. So let's go into the downloads folder, into the desktop testing folder, into desktop testing. It's almost impossible to talk and type cd bin and cd debug. So where I am now is I'm within this downloads folder here, and every executable can be started from a terminal window. This is the basic concept of integrating a Ranorex solution into a continuous integration system, for example. So if I type in here desktop testing.exe and I simply hit the return button, then you will see that the test will be executed just the same as I would execute it from within Ranorex Studio. So Ranorex is executing this runtime file now and is performing the test just as I would do it when I started from within Ranorex Studio. There's only one restriction. In order to execute a test, you need not have Ranorex Studio. That's how it works. If you, for instance, you can execute a test on 10 machines in parallel, and you need not install Ranorex Studio in each machine. But what you need to have is you need to have at least a runtime license. So Ranorex is a license-based sold product, and you can have a full license to run Ranorex Studio, and you can have cheaper runtime licenses on remote machines. It's physical or virtual machines, and this is the basis where you can run tests. So how do you run multiple tests if the test fails, and how to fix it? Yes, this is something we just will be showing right in a second. Maybe we have some other question. How do we send customized reports in the message body and not of an email, not as an attachment? I think you already asked me that yesterday. Am I right? I will answer that just in a second. So will there be an example on the webinar for what's mobile testing? Not today. So the runtime license needs to be bought separately for each machine. Yes. I should tell you on our user. Let me open up now a browser with our homepage. So just a second. Here under products, we have the pricing and the licensing. Here we go. We distinguish between. I don't want to talk too much about prices now, but we have different licenses. We have node-locked licenses and we have floating licenses, which means a node-locked license is bound to one machine. A floating license can change from one machine to another, independent, just where it is used. And we have so-called runtime floating licenses. So you don't need a runtime license for each machine. You need runtime licenses for the number of test cases you want to run in parallel. So if you have 20 machines and you only run 3 tests in parallel, then you only need a runtime floating, and then you can run up to 3 tests in parallel. So this is the basic principle, but reach out to our homepage and there you can see that. So Unfortunately, there's one question which is much too general to cover in this webinar. What is the USP of Ranorex as compared to other products? Unfortunately, I'm sure we cannot answer that completely, but what I show you today should point out some really cool features which are best class in our testing environment. So, how do you run tests on remote machines along with endpoints? I think I can show you this at the end, but first of all, I would like to recap a little bit to validation, because this was something which is, it's first next in a row, and it's second, let me show you that. Sticking to my agenda, yes, explaining of how validation works. I would like to show you this now. So when we come back to validation, here we see it. We have a validation. What does this mean here? What does this validation mean? So let me open up my test application here. Let's remove all the other things a little bit from the screen. So when it comes to validation, what does this mean? Validation is a special type of action here. And validation offers a number of different operators. So for instance, what we are validating now is we are validating if some text attribute equals something. But you can validate if a UI element on the screen is visible or not. So for example, if you do some sanity tests, if you want to check if a graphical user interface is complete and is functional, then you can check if a UI element is existing or not existing. You can not only check against equality or non-equality, you can even check if a button is clickable or if a text entry field receives text or not. You can use regular expressions to use in your validation, and we even have operators to validate images, if images contain something or if they if they can be compared to reference images. Now we are using this attribute, and what we exactly do is, just to show you this, we take the text attribute of this UI element here. This is the UI element welcome, and we take the text attribute of this UI element and compare it to a match value. And the match value is hard-coded here. This is not a good practice. Usually I should take some variable for that. Of course, I can do that. But for the sake of simplicity, I've hard-coded in here. And then the validation ends up in a failure or in a success. And just to show you what it means to raise a failure, let me go back to the insert name recording module, and let's insert Sally instead of Harry. So we are inserting Sally now, but we are validating if the message changes to welcome Harry. And this will cause definitely a failure, and I would like to show you this now. So first of all, let's remove a little bit of these delays, because we are not in a hurry, but I don't want to have it completely slowed down. So I only keep one delay in here. And now let's run the test and see what's happening. So obviously remember, we are raising a validation failure now because we are validating against the wrong reference string. And this is what we're gonna expect yet. So Ranorex is preparing the solution. We are inserting Sally now. Just a second here, Sally is inserted, submitted. Now the validation is against Harry, which causes a number of red lines to appear in the debug information. And finally, the test execution ends up with a red pie chart, which indicates us, oops, there's a problem. And we have one test case which failed now, but yes, fortunately not everything failed. So we have a green bar here, and only the last part is red. So inserting the name really worked well. Submitting the name also worked well. Validating the name, here we have the failure. And what Ranorex does now is, by default, is it first tells us, yes, there is a validation action. and we try to validate if this text appeared is welcome Harry. Then it tells us, oops, there is a failure because currently we found welcome Sally and not welcome Harry. And this is why the test case aborted at this time and it broke. So what happened now is that, as you can see it, the application still has been closed, but the reset button here and the delay here has not been executed. So there was a failure in this validation action, and by default, these two actions here have not been executed. The test has been aborted in this stage, and only the teardown section has been executed at the end. So this is the default behavior of a validation, which again you can also configure. So you can tell the validation not to fail in case of a failure, but to simply proceed and report it. So I hope this gives you some answer to the questions before. And let's have a look at other questions now. So there are some questions regarding the tracking of UI elements, and I will come to this back to this very soon now. So what is the best practice so that the UI element won't get a timeout when Ranorex is searching for it? A very good question, but unfortunately, there's no simple answer to that. It strongly depends on your application. When it comes to web testing, this is a very serious problem because we have very, very individual timeouts there. When it comes to desktop testing, it's a matter of experience with your application. So the best way to handle that is to leave Ranorex in its default behavior, because Ranorex is configured in a very wide sense, and it should cover more than 80% of your requirements. Only if you find out that certain parts of your graphical user interface of your application on the test are behaving differently, then you can change the timeout settings. And all the timeout settings can be changed via the settings dialog. So we have a settings dialog in here. It's heavily described in our user guide, and there is some recorded defaults with timings in here. We have repository defaults for search timeouts. So we have some search timeouts in milliseconds defined here for usual UI elements, for folders, for application folders. These are based on our experience, and of course they can be changed. And they can be changed individually. So you could change them in the properties of the test containers too, and can change the waiting time for UI elements individually. So can you edit the naming of the repository items? Oh, this is a very good question. I will point that out immediately because this is something I wanted to show you. Down there, let me talk a little bit about tracking UI elements and about organizing all of this stuff. So let's first open up our application. And yes, first of all, let's see how we track a UI element, or how Ranorex is identifying a UI element. This is a very nice feature. So let me make this a little bit smaller here. So what we have here now is we have our application, and here we have our recording. There's a track button here. I could click the track button, and now Ranorex disappears in its background. And here, if I hover my mouse over the graphical user interface, the red frame indicates the UI element which is currently identified. And I could simply identify, let's say, this register panel here. So I click it. And what has been done is now that Ranorex has added it as a repository item to my repository here. And I could track another one. Let's go for this one here. and then it identifies it too here. And when I have the third one, usually it's grouping it, but not now. So what I have here now is I add UI elements to my repository. There was one question asking me, what can I do if I cannot track the UI element? So sometimes it's tricky, but usually the red frame should indicate how to track your UI elements. And I would say in 98% of all the cases, you should be able to track all possible UI elements. So you could see that here. I can really track all those elements on the screen here. It's just a matter of trying it out. And of course, you can organize them in here. So what I do here is each repository item in here consists basically of two parts. The first part is a logical name, and the second part is the so-called Ranorex path specification. This specification is somehow kind of mathematical specification. We have a special webinar on that and a special topic. So it's a very changing things here is really an advanced topic. But organizing the UI elements and renaming them is very easy. I can show you this. So first of all, we have this top level folder here. It's called an app folder. All these elements receive their names automatically, so you can change them. So this is not Rx mainframe, it's my Ranorex demo application. So I can rename this. This is a folder which groups, I turn on the highlighting here, and this folder groups all of the UI elements of this introduction register panel here. If I change to another panel here, this would be another grouping of a folder in here. So I do not call it Rx tab introduction. I call it simply introduction. So you know what I mean. Oh, I cannot rename it in the way introduction panel. So that's the way I do it. So, and then you could rename all the fields here. So this is a text entry field, for instance. So I call it, let's say txt name. This is a button, a submit button, so I could shorten the name, button submit, for instance. This is, it's a link, but also it has the function of a button to reset, for instance. And this is the label of the welcome message, which is almost a fine name. And then we have these register panels here. And then, of course, you could group them together into a new folder. So I could make a new folder here. I right click and say a new folder, and I call it registers. And then you could select those three and simply move them in. So this repository is not the Bible. You could even move this up a little bit up here. And so you could change the structure and the names of these repository items, of course. And as I already told you, you can save this separately. You can share this with other solutions and stuff like that. So there's one very important question. Can I edit the Ranorex path without breaking the test? The short answer is yes, you can. But the long answer is there's a way of easily breaking the test when you change this Ranorex path here. So for all those of you who do not know this yet, so this is, I told you, the Ranorex path specification. What does this mean? It means that this specification in here uniquely identifies each UI element. And if you change this, then the chances are high that Ranorex cannot find the element anymore. So if you change this, it might be good, but it is not necessarily good. So you need really know what you're doing there. And as I told you, this is a very advanced topic, and we have a special chapter in our user guide. I would like to show you this. Through the support and the help center, you come to the Ranorex Studio user guide. And as you can see here, we have some fundamental sections here, which is easily explained. So here you find everything about the studio, the recorder, test suite, the actions, and so on and so forth. And within the advanced section down there, you find everything about the Ranorex path. And I recommend you to read about the UI elements first. So within this chapter, for example, we explain in a very detailed way how Ranorex is handling UI elements and what we are storing and knowing about UI elements. And if you know this, then it's better to step into the Ranorex path basics, where we explain how a Ranorex path is constructed and what you can do to change it. So there is a number of examples in here about how to identify a Ranorex path and what to change here. But again, this is an advanced topic which should not be easily taken by beginners. If during the test a pop-up appears on the top, should Ranorex be able to find the UI test? Yes. We have a special, I have given a special webinar yesterday. Yesterday, I have given a webinar on the so-called automation helpers. The automation helpers is a tool set for Ranorex users. And one of these automation helpers is a so-called pop-up handler, a pop-up watcher. And if you reach out to yesterday's webinar recording, you'll find it on our webpage. On our website, in the webinar section, you find out yesterday's on-demand webinar. It will be soon there, so it should be in there. So it's about automation helpers. Let me give me half an hour after today's webinar, and there will be the webinar, or reach out at webinar.com. I send you this, and it's a very easy to handle pop-up watcher, and of course, the Ranorex can handle that. So, one question about the licenses. Okay, for the premium floating, what do you mean by concurrent user licenses? So a floating license is installed once on a so-called license server. So you install a license server on your own, in your own environment, and you put, for instance, 2 floating licenses on that. And then 4 people, 10 people can share those 2 licenses. So a premium floating license can be used on different machines on a lease basis. So whenever a user is starting Ranorex Studio to create a test solution, he's leasing one of your floating licenses, and only one other license is left then. And if 2 people are using concurrently Ranorex Studio, then all your licenses are leased and no third person can work with Ranorex Studio. If one person is stopping Ranorex, closing Ranorex Studio, then another person on another machine can use it there. So this is the basics of floating licenses. And for another question, I want to know on how many machines I can install this license. This is a very simple principle. So node-locked licenses need to be installed on a physical machine. So you need to install a node-locked license on a machine. And once this license is installed, it is active for this machine. You can transfer the license to another machine, but then it is removed from one machine and it's installed on another machine. The advantage of a floating license is that it is not installed on a physical machine. It's installed on a machine with a license server, and any machine in your environment can lease this license at runtime. So this is the explanation of our licensing. So what about dynamically generated elements? Yes, this is a very nice topic, and I should tell you this. So for instance, I have here a playground for dynamic identifiers. So if I show this image, I have an identifier here. it's a dynamically generated identifier. If I hide the image and change it again, it's a different identifier. So this is, you have dynamic identifiers usually in web pages, unfortunately. But I can tell you, Ranorex Studio is aware of this. And whenever Ranorex Studio is recognizing that you have a dynamic identifier, it tries to overcome this. So for example, if I track this element now, let me track this image. I track this image. So you could see now here. Let me point that out by means of a spotlight. So you could see here, I have tracked now this image, and this image has definitely a dynamic identifier, which you could see here in its definition. But Ranorex Studio has no dynamic identifier in the specification here. So Ranorex Studio automatically detects dynamic identifiers and tries to find a specification, an identification, which does not include this dynamic identifier. So this is some kind of artificial intelligence algorithm which we implemented with Ranorex Studio 9.1. And I would say in 90% of all the cases, you don't have a dynamic identifier bound to a UI element. But if you have, then we have a user guide section in our in the support help center. There's a user guide section dealing with dynamic identifiers. I don't know, is it in the expert section? Yes, here it's identifying dynamic UI elements. And in the seldom case that you have a dynamic identifier, a dynamically created element, here's a description of how to overcome this, how to solve this. So we have still 10 minutes to go. I really appreciate all your questions, and I hope that I really can answer most of them. If I fill in, one more question, if I fill in the repository in advance, then when writing, where will the elements be taken from the repository, or will new ones be added to the repo? Very good question. Thank you very much for this. It's very simple. So a repository is organized in a folder-like, in a tree-like structure. And it goes always from top to bottom. So each UI element is not only specified here by its specific path, but also by all the specifications top up to the top. And I could show you this best by editing it in SPY. Let me open up a tool now. Here you can see that. We have a built-in tool. So when you buy Ranorex, the SPY tool comes along with it. SPY tool is a tool which is responsible for identifying and tracking UI elements. And what you see here is that Ranorex SPY always builds a tree-like structure. So it has a tree-like structure of the elements of an element which is found. And this button, for instance, is specified through all the elements up here. And whenever you track a new element, Ranorex is sorting it in. So you cannot track a double element. An element is always identified uniquely. And so usually you don't have the problem if you track the same element in two different solutions. It will have the same Ranorex path specification, and it is identified as one element. And just to keep track, sometimes your repository here becomes overwhelmed and too full, and you don't know, is it current now? Is it clean? Do I have all the elements I need? And we have a very nice function here. It's called the cleanup function. So I click the cleanup function, and what Ranorex does now is Ranorex is searching through my complete test solution and is telling me if I have UI elements which I have tracked but not used. And so I easily can get rid of those. So they are simply all selected, and I click OK, and then I have a clean and up-to-date repository again. So let's see if we have some more questions here. I have this really in reality, testing a server client application, the response time is varying. I click create and only after the server has done the buttons gets clickable. This time varies strongly on performance. Could I wait for activation of buttons or something like this? Yes, you can. I would like to show you this in a very short, because it might be interesting for someone else there too. So for instance, if let's create a new recording module, test wait for. I could simply track an element, let's say the submit button here. So I have my submit button, and then I move it up here and define an action. And now you simply could decide to wait. Here we have a special action here. It's a wait for action. So I could wait for this element to exist, for not exist. I could even now wait for the element to be clickable. So I could choose for an attribute which contains to be clickable, or enabled, or pressed, or visible. So I have access to all of my attributes of this element. So I could say, if this element is really visible, then I go on and work with it. So Ranorex has access to all of the attributes of all of these UI elements, and you can simply add some time delay, not a fixed delay, but to wait if this element comes into visibility or is clickable or something like that. When the Ranorex test pass in execution, can it update the user story status in Jira? Thank you very much for asking this. Yes, we have a seamless integration to Jira, and every test execution reports its status back into Jira. So whenever a test is triggered and executed, it's reporting back to Jira and changes the status of the referring Jira story. Another question, can you write programming language script in addition to edit repository items? I don't think if I get your question right. Can you write programming language in addition to edit repository items? We have two different, in my opinion, if I understand it right, we have two different concepts here. So the first concept is the recording module here, for instance. So if I have, let's open up the insert. Here I have recorded actions. And you can replace every recorded action by some programming or script. So I could even go to the mouse click here. I could view the code, or I could convert it into user code. So if I view the code, then you can see what Ranorex does in C#, for instance. So you could program every action in Ranorex Studio by means of C# or Visual Basic.net. And of course, you can access the repository from within the code too. So I can make use of my complete graphical user interface in the code. For instance, if you have here, you can see it, I'm accessing the button and I click the button by means of using the already defined repository in here. So you can see that here in the code for those of you who are familiar with programming. But what you cannot do, of course, is the repository itself cannot be built up by code. It's usually built up by tracking and identifying. So this is what it's all about here. So still 2 minutes to go. Which other programming languages can be used with Ranorex Studio? So in Ranorex Studio, we only have C# and Visual Basic.net. When it comes to web testing, for example, with Web Tested from Ranorex, we have Java, Python, or TypeScript. But when it comes to desktop testing using Ranorex Studio, we are a .NET-based solution, and you can use C# and Visual Basic.NET. So, one more last question. A side question. There's no side question coming. Is Ranorex recommendable for what? Can I download the other webinars on the website? Oh, very good question. You cannot download any webinar, but you can watch any webinar for free. So we have on-demand video download links, and I will explain this right in a second. Can we integrate Ranorex Studio with Visual Studio? Yes, Ranorex Studio is based on Visual Studio, and the integration is described in our user guide. So I need to come to an end. We are almost done with 90 minutes. And let me see. Yes, let me point that out. I need to come to a short end. The demo application which we used can be downloaded from our download server. So it's ranorex.com//ranorex-demoapp.zip. So it's freely downloadable. You can use it for experimental. And our user guide is at ranorex.com/help/latest, and it's divided in all of those chapters which I have already told you. If you did not happen to do that, experience the power of Ranorex Studio. You can download a fully functional 30-day free trial from ranorex.com/free trial. Give it a try, and yeah, experiment with it. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. I did. It was a pleasure to be here today. I thank you very much for your participation. So it was a lot of fun answering your questions live on this webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to see you again in one of our upcoming webinars. For today, I wish you a great day, a wonderful day. Have a nice day. Thank you very much. And yes, goodbye.